This, my friends, is more cowbell. I am very proud of all the more cowbell references because I have a fever, and the prescription is for more cowbell, made really famous by this one skit. It's listed as the #1 skit of Saturday Night Live of all time. I didn't rate that. It's just an overall rating. I need to tell you, though, the cowbell is an ideophone. In other words, it creates sound primarily by the vibration of the instrument itself versus a wind instrument or string instrument, hand percussion, and obviously named after bells with cows, cows with bells. Top 10 songs, you've got them right there, and they're also in the playlist that you're going to receive right after this finishes up. Let's get into some more serious content. Sarah, should we take in the Mentimeter?
All right. So this is how we engage with all of you, which we find to be one of the most important things during these webinars. So what we're going to ask you to do is pull out your smartphone and or open a second browser on your computer screen and go to menti.com, menti.com, enter the code. That code is going to remain at the top of the screen anytime that we do Mentimeter. We'll also put it into the chat. If for whatever reason you cannot access Mentimeter, you can always put your response into chat, and Jamie Dix behind the scenes will go ahead and put that answer in for you. The first question that we asked, we're always asking you questions about your musical preferences, but this one really links strongly to the topic of the day. We know that music has a huge influence on our emotions, or it can, and so what song or artist do you listen to for motivation? And I have to admit, Matt, do you know I don't know the band or the artist that is actually getting the most number of votes. Can you help me out?
No, but I guess no. we're gonna fine.
We're what?
You won. We're gonna Google it. Fine.
We're
and
gonna
the profanity
Google it.
filter is on, so that's why profanity seemed to be a good one today as well. Yes.
Well, we're seeing a lot of U2, a lot of Van Halen, a lot of Imagine Dragons. We've got some Eminem. So I think we've got everything from big band music to what I would like to call kind of the angry genre of music when we're deciding what to play on our Spotify list when we're trying to get our motivation back.
And there's also a good call out here, like someone put in Depeche Mode, like, wow, it's both sad and dark, and somehow you're like, yep, Depeche Mode, love it. So good on you.
I'm going to bring it. All right, a few questions a little bit more on the nose of our topic for today. And the first one is, how do you feel, and I want you to think about the emotion that you feel right before you meet or interact with somebody who has low emotional intelligence. So you're walking down the hallway, perhaps in pre-COVID times, you're about to go into their office, you're going to have a meeting with them. What is that emotion right before that door opens? So we're seeing anxiety, we're seeing tense, dread. Somebody who said relax, perfectly fine. Nervous, uneasy. Listen to Depeche Mode.
Good one. Good one.
We like it.
You
win
this round, my friend. You win this round.
Drained, careful. Like, okay, I'm going to play this one really close to the vest. Lower my expectations. If I can just kind of mentally get to the place where I'm not going to expect too much, perhaps this is going to go okay. Hesitant. So one thing to acknowledge is that there is emotion attached to this. We know kind of what these behaviors look like, and even before the interaction happens, we're carrying some emotional weight. So we're going to ask you the opposite question. How do you feel right before you meet or interact with somebody who you determine to have high emotional intelligence? Same scenario, walking down the hallway, you're about to go into their office. What is that emotion that you feel? Excited, energized, confident, happy, open. So I'm actually kind of going into it saying, you know what, I'm going to be a little bit vulnerable. I'm going to speak my mind, say my piece.
Motivated,
safe, optimistic, encouraged. Okay, and so I know that these seem like very kind of straightforward or even basic type questions, but when we pause and actually think about the ripple effect of these behaviors and the critical importance when we start thinking about topics like culture and leadership. So let's bring this into our current circumstance. So the current COVID-19.
Do you mind if I just point out really quickly too?
Sure.
I know sometimes we think about this as being devoid or divorced from the business aspect. Well, this is how you mentioned you show up right before with someone who's low emotional intelligence. So you think about how are you going to show up, or how is that person going to show up on their best way? I'm going to give a presentation, financial, project update, frustration, anger, anxious. Then I go into, here's someone that I'm going to interact with from a business aspect, confident, energized, positive, high spirits. So I just don't want us to remove the part that says there is a business and performance aspect to this, and this is what's happening to people. Sorry.
Absolutely. And again, this is a simple question, but one of the ways that we demonstrate emotionally intelligent behavior is by asking people how they're doing. I don't necessarily need to guess at your emotion. I can simply say, how are you doing? So what percentage of people state that their company has not asked how they are doing since the pandemic began, have not even asked the question, I'm curious, how are you doing? So your best guess at what that percentage is. So some of you in the 5% camp, some in the 32, some in the 25, a good percentage of you who are in the 40% camp. The answer is 40%. And this is one statistic that we've pulled. We've actually seen others that say it could be upwards of 60%. And so a good percentage of people who say, my company hasn't even checked in. So before we even get to low or high emotional intelligence, I haven't even been asked the question. If I'm going to ask you, how are you doing? Then what percentage of people, this is our next question for you, report higher stress, higher anxiety, and would call themselves emotionally exhausted? So if I combine all of those things together, what percentage of people would claim to be these things? Is it 14%, 53%, 25%, or a third of people who feel this way? So as we see these responses coming in, a good percentage of you clustering around that 53% category. So more than half of us who feel some measure or some degree of these things. And so I think it is safe to say that emotions are heightened. So we'll talk about this topic in the context of the everyday. Certainly this is always something that's critical in leadership and culture, but we know right now it could be even more important. So we're going to go ahead and switch back to the slides. Here's the breakdown of those stats. So 75% of us feel more socially isolated. That one's fairly easy to understand. A good percentage of us are working from home, not all of us, but a good percentage. 67% report higher stress, 57% are feeling greater anxiety, and 53% feel emotionally exhausted. And so if we just take that single moment of walking down the hallway, being around somebody with low emotional intelligence and saying, now we're carrying a lot of those emotions for a bigger percentage of the day. And to Matt's point, that has a very real impact on how the business is doing or our ability to execute within the business. So why are our emotions such a big deal? Thank you, Jared Leto, for the graphic. A lot of it has to do with the brain science piece. And we're not going to go into this in a tremendous amount of depth, and we'll acknowledge there's probably people on the call who know the subject in great detail. But in the most kind of simplistic terms, there's a portion of our brain that accounts for our instinctive responses. So breathing, things that we don't have to think about, it keeps us alive. That portion of the brain works automatically. A portion of our brain is our thinking brain. That's where we solve problems. It's where we're creative. It's where we think of new ideas. And there's a portion of our brain that has the emotional center. It actually operates also as somewhat of an mission control. And so the emotional part of our brain actually directs and calls us to put resources towards our thinking brain versus our instinctive brain that keeps us alive. And so often quoted when we're talking about emotional intelligence is that fight or flight response. So if I feel under threat, if I'm under higher stress, if I have more anxiety, if I have all of these emotions, and we just looked at most of us are, then resources are diverted through this mission control mechanism in our brain simply to keeping us alive versus being more innovative, being more creative, our ability to think through problems. So one of the reasons why this is such a big deal is if I'm not emotionally intelligent, if I don't work on controlling or regulating those emotions, and we're going to get into what those terms mean, then I am less productive from a thinking brain standpoint. So I know that's a very simplistic explanation, but it's why this topic is so important. The connection to the first question we asked you, so what's the music that you listen to increase your motivation? It's pretty fascinating when you think about, and even we didn't know all of this when we decided to have a music theme to all of these webinars. When we listen to music, our brains actually release dopamine. It's the same chemical that you get both for receiving a reward and illegal drugs. And so if you want the easy way to get dopamine, it is by listening to music and music that you love. oftentimes people will say things like, well, classical music is the best. And there are some linkages to perhaps I'm a little bit more calm when I listen to classical music, but the very best for dopamine release is actually the music you grew up listening to. So for each person, it is individual, and perhaps some of those songs made the list that you entered in for our first question today. So that's your brain on music. We also know that IQ being equal, and so that's smarts, that's intelligence. IQ is something that we are born with. It is something that you can't necessarily increase our critical thinking skills. If I equalize that and say I've got the same pool of smart people, emotional intelligence contributes 80 to 90% of competencies that distinguish outstanding from average leaders. And so of all the smart leaders out there, the balance, the difference of a good leader to an outstanding leader, it's all in emotional intelligence. The other way to frame this is IQ can get you through school, but emotional intelligence gets you through life. Sometimes we consider these to be very soft skills. And we'll get into what emotional intelligence is not. It's worth pointing out that and if you had to think about, okay, what's the biggest, baddest group of humans out there? And perhaps that's the Navy SEALs. We work with some of them. In their creed, it actually states the ability to control my emotions and actions sets me apart from other men. So lest we go down the road of these are soft skills, and sometimes people will ask the question, well, are women more emotionally intelligent than men? And we're not going to go into that debate. This is a really critical piece. Matt, anything to add on that one?
I thought you were going to say retired Air Force officers for like the biggest, baddest, but then so it was kind of a surprise, but I guess we'll just keep going.
We did it a different way in rehearsal, but okay. I changed my mind. So emotional intelligence is and is not. So emotional intelligence, quite simply, is intelligence about emotions, if we were to give the most simplistic description. It is not being nice to people. It is not being a quote-unquote people person. It's not being a perpetual optimist. It's not being an extrovert. It's not a skill that some people have and others do not. And when we do this in live sessions, people are like, yeah, that's just not me. We're here to tell you it can be learned. It's not a soft skill. We interviewed Kristen Hadid yesterday, and she had a great quote around, quote unquote soft skills. And she said, if they're soft skills, then why are they so hard to learn? So we don't love that terminology. And it's certainly not only for times of crisis. So the earlier stats would tell us that this is really what defines what outstanding leadership actually looks like. Breaking it down into kind of its components. This is from Daniel Goleman, who is really kind of credited with being the father of this idea. He's the one who popularized it. He's the one who did a lot of research in how do you actually break down this idea? And it goes into kind of 5 buckets. And so just briefly, it does include empathy, my ability to understand the emotions of others. It includes my own self-awareness. So how do I recognize my emotions, but also where those emotions create strengths and limitations? It's my ability to do self-regulation. So we are all what we like to call chronically human. We all have emotions, and it's the ability to actually regulate and manage and make intentional choices. I'm feeling this emotion, but yet I still have a choice over the behavior that I exhibit. It links to motivation. And so where is that internal resource or that internal drive, that energy, that persistence that's not linked to something extrinsic, money or a reward? And then absolutely it links to social skills. How do I manage relationships? How to create the environment in which people feel like they can express their emotions and I can find common ground and build rapport with people? We will send this to you as a resource. If I was to add, okay, well, what does this actually look like? How do I know that this is potentially an area of strength for me? Self-awareness looks like self-confidence. I appreciated the one that is self-deprecating sense of humor. Really good humorists, really good comedians. The reason they're good is because there's so much truth to it and they're aware of something. Empathy, I can feel what you feel. Social skills, that optimism even in the face of failure, it links to resilience. Motivation links to this expertise in building and retaining talent. How am I creating the environment for people to come in and be motivated? And then self-regulation looks like I can lead. I know how to have the emotion, triage the emotion, and then translate it into behaviors that lead to the best of other people. And so that's connected to expertise in building and leading teams. And so we will make sure that you have this as a resource. When we think about it, then we go to, okay, so what does low emotional intelligence look like versus high? You guys gave us your responses in terms of what is that feeling. Here are some of the behaviors. So low emotional intelligence. People who perhaps talk even if it won't help, just sound of my own voice. Brush off people when bothered, don't know what's wrong with that person, can't get into it. People who deny that emotions impact their thinking, like I'm perfectly fine. Get defensive when challenged, routinely focus on tasks over people or leave the people part out of the equation. And people who just blow by the unspoken tension, like we all know that there's a problem here, yet I'm not giving voice to it. Versus highly emotionally intelligent people, they have a very good sense of when to speak up. They keep lines of communication open even when frustrated, even when it's hard. They recognize when people are affecting their emotional state. They're very open to feedback and don't have that initial defensive mechanism. They show others that they care about them, and they accurately pick up on the mood of the room. So sometimes you're in that situation and you want to say to yourself, like, just read the room. People who perhaps fall on the higher end, this is easier for. Perhaps people on the lower end, they kind of miss the cues and signals of what's happening. So one way to diagnose. We want to give you ways that you can actually apply this, and we're going to give it to you in 3 distinct areas: awareness and regulation, communication, and decision-making.
Great, thank you. Before we jump into this, I'm going to tell you a quick story about emotional intelligence or the behaviors of it, because I know that we're talking about an individual, right? That this is an individual skill set, but especially in leadership and organizations, you have a ripple effect that cascades out into the organization. So I'll give you a very short example about emotional intelligence applied. And you see this especially today with all the emphasis on our first responders and the frontline workers in healthcare. So Sarah and I were driving home in separate cars a few years back, and we were at an intersection, and right as we pulled up the intersection, there was a car accident. So a person had hit the front end of a minivan and just tore it completely off. So I got out of the car, ran over there, opened up the door, and the airbag had gone off, and it was just deflating. And there was a woman in the car. She was the only one in there. And the first thing I said, and you can tell that she's very scared. Now, I could open up the door and start yelling and screaming like, holy cowbell, look at this car. Was this your fault? Probably was. Did you run that red? If you wanted a new car, you needed to do this. Man, this thing is a mess. I could be yelling and screaming, talking about, hey, there's smoke coming out of there. I don't know what that is. Instead, the first thing, especially in items like this, the first thing you say is you say your first name. Hi, my name is Matt. You've been in a car accident. Everything is fine. You're safe. Is there anyone else in the car? Very calm, very slow, and because I want to regulate my emotions so that she can as well. Coming in and being really like it's the end of the world or communicating or these type of things. This is why emotional intelligence is so important, not just in the car accident, not just in the military standpoint, but day to day, and especially during COVID, where when we ask organizations, is your business going to be better, worse, or the same? The least percentage that people are answering our business will be the exact same. So that's the reason for this. We have an entire curriculum built around emotional intelligence. We have a class called Connect that we teach this in. It has a multi-rater, quasi-360 emotional intelligence rating into it. There are 6 areas. We dive into it. We only have an hour with you. So it's awareness and regulation, communication, decision-making is what we're going to give you some tools on. Here's what I'd like you to do, and this is for homework for you all. It's a very powerful exercise for those of you that were willing to go through this, and that is, I want you to think back 24 hours. So right now it is 11:24 a.m. Central Daylight Time in the U.S. If I went back to 11:24 a.m. yesterday, and I'm going to take that period of time, and I'm going to write down every single emotion that I can remember that I felt. Hungry, tired, perhaps angry.
Hungry is not an emotion.
No, it's not. Angry is not an emotion, FYI. If I went back and I'd write all those down, after I do that, then I want to take this, we call this an emotion wheel. And so at the center there, you just see some major emotions like I was joking around with: happy, surprised, angry, sad, fearful. Then it breaks them into further and further. One part of this is, I want you to think about all the emotions that you actually go through in a 24-hour period. Then I want you to think about, do I have the literacy to be able to call it that? So if I am, there's a big difference. As an example, I'm going to take the anger route here. There's a big difference between feeling angry and feeling disrespected, or angry and resentful. There's a difference between, hey, I'm angry and I'm just withdrawn. And the ability to name the emotions for yourself, and especially for people that you lead or people that you influence or interact with, can be really powerful. It gives us further access into this. The other reason is I want you to see how many other emotions you have in a day that perhaps we're not conscious of. Once you do that, we're going to put it into this 2x2. I want to think about, as I list all those emotions, I'm going to add the other ones after I look at the emotion wheel. I'm going to think, if I didn't have that, if I didn't know that that emotion was there, I put that in the unconscious area. If I knew about it and I named it, I put that in the conscious. Yes, I was conscious, I was angry about it. Perhaps I wasn't. And I'm not going to say that one's positive and one's not positive. We call them productive and unproductive. So as an example, perhaps I was a little bit felt disrespected, and I mentioned that, and perhaps I showed up in that way. Well, that might have been productive in that moment. We'll get into that, but it's productive and not productive, not good or bad. And the way we think about whether it's productive or not productive is, did you intend to do it, and did it have the outcome you wanted it to have? Because if that's the case, then I think it is productive. Anything else to add on this one, Sarah?
Nope. Okay.
Okay, and that's on the 2x2. So that's how we link these emotions back to one another. It's not about the controlling part. It's about managing this. Can I observe my emotions? Can I be in a skillful state? And can I make that conscious choice versus I'm just going to push everything down? It's the quote by Red Dawn. They said, all that fire is going to burn you up. And the person says, no, it just keeps me warm. No, it doesn't. It actually just really makes it more challenging for you to show up as a person that people can count on, stable, predictable, understanding, and being empathetic. So managing versus that controlling aspect. Okay, I'm going to show you a quick video about how this happens in our mind and how it happens to one another, right? So I'm going to show you a clip from the movie Inside Out. I know it's a kid's movie. It is a fantastic movie, and it was actually done with scientists that are very steeped in emotional intelligence. You're going to see a video, and the characters are inside each person's head. Their anger, disgust, joy. And on one child, this child is new and has moved into a different area. They just moved to San Francisco, and you're going to see a conversation between the wife and the husband, the mom and the dad, and the emotions that are playing in their minds, and also the emotions that's playing in the child's mind as well. So this is from Inside Out.
Joy. Something is definitely going on.
She's never acted like this before. What should we do? We're gonna find out what's happening, but we'll need support. Signal the husband. Ahem.
With a nice pass over the reed, comes across that right.
Uh-oh, she's looking at us. What did she say?
What? Oh, sorry, sir. No one was listening.
Is it garbage night? We left the toilet seat up. What? What is it, woman? What?
He's making that stupid face again.
I could strangle him right now.
Signal him again.
Ah, so, Riley, how was school?
Are you kidding me?
For this, we gave up that Brazilian helicopter pilot?
Boo! I'll be Joy.
School was great, all right?
Riley, is everything okay?
Sir, she just rolled her eyes at us.
What is her deal? All right, make a show of force. I don't want to have to put the foot down.
No, not the foot.
Riley, I do not like this new attitude.
Oh, I'll show you attitude, okay? No. Stay happy!
What is your problem? Just leave me alone.
Sir, reporting high levels of sass.
Take it to DEFCON 2.
You heard that, gentlemen? DEFCON 2.
Listen, young lady, I don't know where this disrespectful attitude came from.
You want a piece of this, Pops? Come and get it!
Yeah, well...
Here it comes. Prepare the foot.
Keys to second position. Ready to launch on your command, sir.
Just shut up!
Fire!
That's it. Go to your room. Now.
Foot is down. The foot is down.
Good job, gentlemen. That could have been a disaster.
Well, that was a disaster.
All right, so you might ask, great, well then how do we keep that from happening? So one of the tool sets is literally what we call a timeout. So if you think about any kind of sports team, when it's running out of control, let's call it when I need to gather back, when I need to have a different plan, the first thing that happens is take a timeout. literally this is what's happening in our mind. We're running around, we're running plays, we're trying to adjust to whatever the change in circumstances are. And in sports, when it comes to like, we need to get people more together, I need to get my emotions together, I'm taking a timeout. I'm just taking a break. And sometimes it can just be a few seconds. And I'll just admit this, like Zoom is great. Now I have virtual meetings. I can just stop video and go on mute and just have my little moment. During the timeout, though, it's important for the questions that you're asking yourself. What part do you own? You start with yourself. What part do I own? Am I considering both the emotion side and the logic? Is there information the group needs to hear? And if I do need to share something, is it right now? Should it be from me? And can I think about what is positive, even if it's just the learning that's occurring? So one tool on this part of it in the awareness is looking at others, is looking at myself, and to regulate, not to control, but to understand what my emotions are. That 24-hour emotion activity can be powerful. It increases my emotional literacy to myself and to others, and then the ability to take a time out. We're going to move into the next one that's under communication.
All right, so emotional intelligence as applied to how we communicate. And to get into this, we're going to actually go back into Menti and ask you a couple of additional questions. And so another from a statistical standpoint, since the COVID-19 outbreak, what percent of people want at least weekly communication from their leader, from their organization? So how many people would say, I would love it if I could hear from my leader and getting some communication about the state of things, at least from a weekly standpoint? And feel free to put that into chat if you're not able to put it into Mentimeter, and Jamie will enter that for you. So as we reveal the correct answer, you will not be surprised that it is 90%. So the vast majority of us, one is, am I opening up these actual pathways? The second question that we have for you relative to communication has more to do with how we're showing up, perhaps from a more nonverbal standpoint. Before my leader says a word, whomever that happens to be, your direct leader, I can tell if they are in a good or bad mood, true or false. And so a good percentage of people who are coming in on the true camp. So acknowledging that for not all of us this is true, but for a good percentage of people, I can tell the minute you walk into the room potentially how this conversation is going to go. And so yes, it is the formal communication, and I want to hear that on a regular basis. But it is also, are we taking ownership a little bit from a nonverbal standpoint? So that nonverbal is where we're actually going to start the conversation. What's interesting about nonverbals is that we've always actually had them. It's actually how we started to communicate. We all began communicating without a language. And so this is why, and it's a little having to do with baby's eyesight, but it's also when we have little ones and we put our face really, really close to the child, and then we use our facial expressions, and they're really exaggerated, and we're hoping that the child kind of gives us some indication back. And parents, if you have kids, that moment you get the first smile, and we start to communicate all the way up until they start to share their first words. We become very fluent in nonverbal communication.
Hey, Sarah,
yeah.
Can I just add as well, like if you think about the logic of this, like no one told a child that showing and baring your teeth at someone in a smile is a good thing. Like the child's the smallest thing, and now a giant face with teeth is showing up, and that's supposed to be good. Like that's the fascinating part about, I don't know who told the kid that showing your teeth is a good thing, but there you go.
There you go. We are trained and we are conditioned. This, by the way, is my now 10-year-old. So this is how long we've been teaching this content. That is baby Benjamin. So nonverbals, we've started and we began communicating without a language. It has not stopped. We break it down further into 3 components. So my nonverbal, my facial expression, my gestures, literally how I'm showing up. Am I slumped back? Am I sitting forward? Am I leaning into the conversation? My word choice, the descriptors, the sentences, how expressive or not expressive I'm being, and how congruent is that with how I typically show up. And then absolutely the tone, the emotions that creep in. And I think we can all relate to the times when we know it's happening and I just can't stop it. I know I sound frustrated. And we'll talk a little bit about how sometimes that is actually a good thing or not. The point is, am I making an intentional choice of the attitude or the emotion that I am sharing? We also know that if we use the exact same words, the absolute exact same words, but the tone, the tenor, the framing is a little bit different. You can have a very different result. And so to make that point very vividly clear, we're going to show you one of our favorite State Farm commercials.
I'll be back. Is this my car?
State Farm knows that for every one of those moments,
This is ridiculous!
there's one of these.
Is this my car? What? This is ridiculous.
This can't be happening!
This can't be happening.
Oh, it's happening, sweetheart.
Oh, it's happening, sweetheart.
Shut up!
Shut up!
That's why State Farm is there.
What a day.
With car insurance for when things go wrong,
What a day!
but also here with car loans to help life go right. State Farm.
So if you ever doubt that doesn't matter, my tone, my facial expressions, it's a vivid example. And on our team, the phrase, "Oh, it's happening, sweetheart," is commonly used for a variety of situations. So we are the message always. None of us get out of this. It's 24/7. And this is not to say that you need to be one kind of message. It is not to say that we always need to be happy and cheery. Sometimes the message I need to send is one that I'm disappointed, or perhaps the message I'm sending is I am frustrated, and I need as a team for us all to work together to eliminate that frustration. We do need to acknowledge that I am constantly sending a message, and I do own that from each of us from an individual standpoint. So you are the message. We often will, and we're about to ask you all the question of how do people know if you are on message or off message? And there is a phrase, and I know most of you are thinking of the other phrase, which we are not going to go down the road of, but the male equivalent of that phrase is attributed and called resting murder face. This is just facts news you can use. And so got us curious, what is the actual definition of resting murder face? And this is the best one that we could find, which is the combination of a scowl and the half-interested look lions at the zoo get when watching pigeons. We all are prone to this, some of us more than others, and it is something actually to be very mindful of. If you are in a work-from-home environment, we are on all these virtual conference calls, people are noticing. People can tell either that we're not engaged and or perhaps I'm displaying what we like to call resting murder face. And I can see. Anything to add, Matt? You came off mute.
No, I'm good.
Okay. We're all prone to this. Okay, so the question for you all, and I'm going to ask you to just go ahead and put this in on chat. How do you show up at work on your best day versus your worst day? And so what are the cues, clues, and signals? So some of them that we have heard, and when we do this with live groups, one individual shared, my team knows that the day is not going well when my hair goes up in a ponytail. Like that's the signal, we have had enough. For some people, they talk about, okay, well, the best day, and this particular example was somebody who works in the airline industry and is actually responsible for leading all the customer service agents. And so she said, well, the trick that I use is actually I never go out into the actual airport working environment without actually putting lipstick on it. It has nothing to do with the makeup. It is the signal of saying, I'm going to go out and I'm going to show up with all the nonverbals that say, I'm here to listen to you, I'm here to serve you. So I like the things that are coming in. Talkative equals good, silent equals bad. On the best day, you're going to get the smiling and the positive attitude. The best day looks energetic, optimistic, and organized. The worst looks frazzled. We can all relate to that. Like we just don't have it together. Again, for the quiet versus talkative, I could say for me, that's probably a dead giveaway. If I just go silent, I'm not a fighter, but I will shut down. And so what is that signal that would tell somebody it's not going so well?
And hey,
That's
sir, for the people who are very expressive, this is challenging. Because if you are a naturally very expressive person, then you're coming in and it's the first thing. And I see that a lot in the chat room. For someone who's very jovial, I'm laughing, I'm talking a lot, and now all of a sudden I'm quiet. This is why you get the question, what's the matter? It might not be anything to matter. It might just be deep in thought, but you're sending those messages. And sometimes it's the fact that you're not sending a message is the cue. It's the clue that people look for.
Mm-hmm. And I know that we have people who are logged in who have formal leadership responsibility and perhaps some that do not have formal leadership responsibility. For those who are formal leaders, the research would show that your emotions have a disproportionate impact on the emotions of others. It just is. And so those bad days, those bad moments, we will say in the same breath, we're all chronically human. However, are we aware that those cues, clues, and signals are going to affect the people in our span of care, and what are the things that we can do to perhaps mitigate that from happening.
In this area of the communication, let's talk about authenticity for a moment. We mentioned, and we showed you a video of the Marriott CEO, I believe that was in Leading Through Change, and how important authenticity is during times of heightened awareness and change. A lot of times people, we use and throw this word around conceptually, but not actually knowing what it means. It means when we align both our emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. In other words, it's not being the mindless cheerleader. I'm just the perpetual optimism that's all going to work out. It's here's how I'm feeling, here's what I'm thinking, and here are my nonverbals that line up with that becomes authentic. This is why it becomes very unauthentic when someone is highly emotional, but it doesn't really seem like they actually feel that way. We have almost like a sixth sense about this. And so we'll call people authentic when they're showing up in all of these areas. It's the ability to share how you're feeling to the right person, the right time, and the right amount using the right medium. Well, this is Yo-Yo Ma with just an unbelievable cello player. Right person, right time, right amount, using the right medium. So let me show you a video of this. And for this, I'm going to show you the video, the last final seconds of the Sully Sullenberger flight, U.S. Air flight that landed in the Hudson River. And it's just the last amount of time. And I want you to pay attention to a few things here. One is the silence that occurs. Two is the tone, the tenor, and the amount of communication that's happening and how deliberate he's being in this. Now, it's played by Tom Hanks, but this rendition of this section in the flight deck between the co-pilot and the pilot, it is identical to what the cockpit recording actually had, the black box recording of what it was said. So the words that are coming out of Tom Hanks' mouth, the words that are coming out of the co-pilot's mouth, they are identical to what was said during this time. So I'm going to roll this video and then we'll chat about it.
Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Cactus 1549. Hit birds. We've lost thrust on both engines. We are turning back towards LaGuardia.
Which engine did you lose?
Both engines.
Ignition. Thrust levers confirm idle.
Cactus 1549, if we can get it for you, do you want to try to land on runway 13?
We are unable. We may end up in the Hudson.
It's going to be left traffic, runway 31.
Unable.
Okay, what do you need to land?
No reload after 30 seconds and Newmaster 1 and 2 confirm off.
Off.
Terrain. Too low. Terrain. Too low. Terrain. Too low. Terrain.
This is the captain. Brace for impact.
All right, so he's at 140 knots at around 500 feet of altitude, and you notice how the calmness of this, especially when communicating like through Zoom or on radios or these type of things, it's not a bravado piece about staying calm amidst all the chaos. I'm literally needing to convey some information. I want you to know the severity of the situation, but I also don't want my emotions to rise up to the point where you're not getting the communication correctly. It's the reason for the enunciation. It's the reason for the calmness. It isn't about how brave I can be in these situations. It's so that I can literally get people the information they're requiring at that time. So authenticity is aligning both my behaviors, my thoughts, and my feelings into that, which leads a lot into a lot of the decision-making. So the decision-making, there's a difference between a reaction, instant, I'm just reacting to this, versus the response. All of our leadership development and people development, professional development curriculum is based on, can I increase your consciousness level to where I'm much more in the response versus the reaction? The response is more from the conscious mind. I'm thinking about this and I understand where I'm supposed to be going with it. So how do we respond in these ways? But one area is in logical and emotional kind of mindsets. And so before I give you a kind of a graphic of this and have you interact with it, I'm going to ask you another question here in Menti, and that is, when you're making a decision, let's think of bigger decisions, where do you tend to start? If I have to force you into saying, I want to know, where do you start? Do you start with the logic? What are the facts? How does this work out? Or do I start on the emotion side? Not a right or wrong here. As you can see, there's no correct answer. Just asking you, when you're faced with a decision, you're making a decision, where do you start? It's almost like where do you default to? even before I start to bring it in, what do I look for? And one way to answer this question is to say, what's the first thing that goes through my mind? Do I go to Google something about some of the facts? Do I think about how it's going to impact others? And so in this case, you see with about 50 of you reporting, 16 on the emotion side and about 33 on the logic side. That's perfectly fine. Let me show you how this interacts with decision making. We'll call this the wise mind. And what I would offer is, and we're going to provide you all of these slides, what I'd offer is, I sometimes think about where would I put a pencil dot of where I begin. Like I probably begin pretty squarely in the logical circle. That's where I begin. And if I know that and I'm conscious of it, what I'm trying to do is take in more of the emotional side of things, because I'm going to need to not only make the decision, but then communicate it to other people. The wise mind takes in both the emotions and the logic of the situation. And a fascinating pop culture reference for this would be Spock. So I'm a Star Trek fan, and there's a quote by him: I find your highly emotional reaction is most illogical. Spock was a character that was basically written on the far right-hand side of the logical mind, devoid of any emotions. Then they just made a character out of it. And then Spock went around and thought, why would you ever let feelings get in the way of facts and figures and logic? And then the human race would come back and be like, how can you not take in the feelings? And so for some people who default more into a logical mindset, perfectly fine to bring all of that in. Your decisions get better, and you're able to communicate them better to people that want to lean into them, when I can take into effect the feelings as well. So you say, okay, well, how does this work? Well, I'm going to take in far left-hand side, and move from the left to the right. I'm going to take in emotional data, and here's how the questions I'm going to ask. How do I feel about it? How do I think others are going to feel about it? And then I'm going to get very specific. Who do I think is going to be nervous, unsure, perhaps challenged? Now, for me, I'm going to lean into my kind of default area, my wheelhouse, and what financial implications, what other facts should I be considering? I'm trying to play 3 or 4 chess moves ahead. What's this going to drive? What does a post-COVID environment look like? What skills am I going to need to operate into that area? That's the logical piece. I'm going to bring in my own values. For me, a huge value of mine would be respect for people. And so how am I bringing that in as well? And then when I found that part of it out, then I'm going to it's almost like litmus testing or reverse engineering the math problem to make sure that I got it right. I'm going to ask other people's perspectives. Who have I not considered? Who could I benefit from making a better decision in bringing in perhaps even more logical or emotional data? And this way, it's almost like a check back on the things that I just gave you. If you're joining us a little bit late, we will provide all of these slides and this as a resource as well. Now, once I have emotional data, I've taken in logical data, my values and my perspectives, now I'm going to communicate it. But I'm going to communicate it using this information, especially when I'm communicating to multiple people. I want them to know I'm going to get into the numbers. I'm going to tell you what the numbers are, but I also want you to know deep down how I feel about, especially when they're bigger decisions. So we've had to make difficult decisions in our business. And so one of the things that we communicate to our team members is literally how we feel about it. It's difficult. It weighs heavy on our conscience, these kind of decisions. Here's the logical information we're considering. I'm going to bring up either my own personal values or, in this case, organizational values. We've asked these other people, we've sought their counsel. That's how messaging comes back to an organization. Oftentimes we think, let's just hit the logical information. Here are the facts. Here's what's happening. And people want to know, yeah, but how did you feel about that? Are you really that callous? Are you really just that logical about these things? Now I start to erode trust. Now I start to wonder about where the organization is going. I know I layered on a lot right there, but this is how I make the decision. I'm taking in emotional, logical values, other perspectives. Then when I communicate it, I'm making sure that I bring all of those to bear so that people literally can see inside of my mind what I was thinking, how the decision was made, and how I'm caring for them and caring for the information that's there. So that is an example about how we communicate that out.
All right. Before we kind of give you what are some next steps and things that you can do, just to address a few of the questions that are in the Q&A. The first one is, no one wants to be labeled as low emotionally or having low emotional intelligence. How can we help them? Want Matt to add his thoughts to this one as well. I think the number one for me would be, you're right, saying to somebody, hey, you're not very emotionally intelligent it almost comes across like a judgment, or it's my opinion of your level of emotional intelligence and the degree to which I can give you specific behaviors. Like, I'm concerned that we're not taking people into our decision making, or I need to give you some feedback on your nonverbals. It seems like perhaps this is what you're experiencing or what you're feeling, and this is what your nonverbals are communicating. So the degree to which I can break it into behaviors. The assessment that we use is the reason we enjoy it is because it doesn't rate your ability to be emotionally intelligent. It actually gives you feedback on whether or not you're displaying the behaviors. Matt, anything else to add on that one?
I would just add that one way to give that feedback is for you to regulate the emotions of the group as you see them. So you can call that out, not by saying this person did something wrong, but if the person is a little bit more, let's call it amped up, and you can see that coming out in the organization, I can say to regulate it back and to say, hey, I'm sensing there's a lot of trepidation right now, or I'm sensing there's a lot of uncertainty. Here's what I know. And then afterwards, you can ask that person, hey, how do you think people felt? How do you think people felt after you remarked on it? So allowing them to come to this and for you naming your own emotional intelligence and what you're doing can help.
All right, now this is a question where I think the question is going to sound smarter than our response to the question. I'm just going to say that out loud. So from David, the self casts a shadow. Emotional intelligence reduces that shadow. How does the environment in which one works affect emotional intelligence? If there is dissonance, does this cause moral injury and lead to burnout? If we were live and in person, I would respond 100% with, please tell me more about that question.
I would have answered yes.
Yes, there's so much in here. I think one of the things, and I'm reading into this because it is a little difficult to parse out, certainly the burnout happens when I continually am emotionally hijacked. And so there is a big difference between I'm emotionally intelligent, I'm being very thoughtful about my emotions and the emotions of others, and getting swept up into the emotions that other people are having. So in a medical community, for example, the empathy burnout is very, very real because I'm trying to feel what other people are feeling. I'm trying to be emotionally intelligent, but it is taxing on myself. So that is one thing. How do I regulate that from happening and not actually become emotionally hijacked? Certainly the emotional intelligence from a standpoint of we all have a shadow that we carry with us that we may or may not be aware of. Asking people for feedback is the best way to understand how big of a shadow we are casting, and is it positive or negative? Is that a dread scenario when people are coming to meet with us, or is it the happier scenario? So those are my quick thoughts on a very, very deep question.
Sarah, I would just add, because Sarah and I sometimes run panels, and so if I know that the panel is a panel that I'm not going to show up in my best way, one is, am I aware that I'm walking into that environment? If so, I'm a lot more conscious about how I'm sitting, what my answers are, how much I'm speaking, what my nonverbals are. I'm literally walking in knowing, okay, this is an area that I don't show up the best in, therefore be thinking about it. What's my game plan going in? Literally, I'm thinking about it beforehand.
And then a very timely question around relative to layoff or furlough decisions. How do you balance HR needs to state the facts versus the actual emotional information, values, and perspectives? And so, there's a resource out on our website that is kind of the ordering, or at least our recommendation on how you order those things. We would say it's in equal measure. Yes, absolutely. I need to give you, here is the government assistance, here's how you access this piece. I need to answer all of those FAQs, but I also really need to start with our concern is for your safety and your wellness, and we're going to continue to be concerned with that if you're part of this family or you're not. Two, here are our values, and here's how this decision connects to that. Then some of the financial information and the logistics of how this is going to work. And so we would just offer that we see those. And I think HR gets labeled as the facts people. And we would argue whomever is carrying that communication, and we want to display both the logical and the emotional in equal measure.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating that I know we tend to divert more to the facts of the logic because we're worried about liability. In other words, funding. And in this case, does it change the facts if we say this was a very challenging decision for us to make? Mm-hmm. I'm going to tell you what it was, a little bit of feeling. I think we're not going to get into it because of time, but the CEO of Airbnb, I think they just did some layoffs. And so he had a message out to the world about literally giving his email about his people and how he was concerned. It's a very, very well done. So we'll provide that as a resource as well.
And then a question in here about what are tools that you can use when people don't realize they're exhibiting negative nonverbals. The best one I have is honestly just give them the direct feedback and say, hey, I'm not sure if you're aware your nonverbals are communicating this to me. It may not be what you intended. Can we have a conversation about whether that's true or not true? So I'm not going to jump to the conclusion, but I am willing to give that feedback. So emotional intelligence applied. So just to click back one slide, here are some things that you can actually do from all the information that we presented. So do the 24-hour emotion activity if you would like to. And really, every time we do this with people, the number is going to increase when I actually reference the list from when I do not. So that'll tell you exactly how conscious you are of the emotions that you're experiencing. Then you can get into, was it a productive? Did it fuel me in a healthy way? And this does not correlate to negative emotions are non-productive and positive emotions are productive. Anger can be highly productive if I made an intentional choice. So how many were productive versus non-productive? I'm going to ask, we just covered this in the Q&A, I'm going to ask someone who knows you well for feedback on your nonverbals. How do they know? And I just asked them the simple question, what's my tell? How do you know when I'm on and off message? And then I'm going to run that decision-making framework to a current decision that you're making. And I'm going to use those 12 questions and kind of check off and see if that either changes the decision, and perhaps it might not, but it might change how you choose to communicate that decision.
Hey, Sarah, as we go to the next slide, just one really quick comment, a really good question from the chat. Do we see a difference in how emotionally open mid-level managers are versus C-level? And I know we don't have time to get into it right now. I would tell you that the place where we see senior executives, their careers go off the rails, it's not because they're not smart enough, they're not versed enough in the industry, or they're not strategically thinking that way. It's because of their emotional intelligence and their inability to get basically along with others and for others to understand them. I don't know that we would see a difference in hierarchy of levels. We see it equal, and we see this is the part where a lot of times as people have gone up their career, they didn't get training in this area, and they weren't given the feedback that Sarah just mentioned. So I wouldn't say that we see it in one area more, but we do see it prevalent in both.
And one way to help those who are quote unquote in middle management is if senior leadership models it. So am I creating the environment in which this is called out is something that's really, really critical.
And gives that feedback.
So during COVID, so we've already kind of made this point that the stress levels, the anxiety is certainly heightened during this time. And so this is another, it goes to 11, amping up the emotional intelligence. How am I focusing on things that are positive? How am I creating that environment in which the emotions are more positive? How am I increasing flexibility? The connection here is I'm acknowledging that you are in a higher stress situation, you have more anxiety, therefore I'm going to choose to increase the flexibility that we have. From a leadership standpoint, we already mentioned leaders have a disproportionate impact on the emotions of others. And so that self-regulation, not the control, but the self-regulation becomes even more important. And how do I just name the fact that there is a whole lot of gray area? Gray area can increase people's anxiety and emotional level, and acknowledging it, labeling it, saying there's a lot that we don't know. There's no secret answer. There's nothing that we're hiding from you can help to decrease some of those negative emotions. So like we typically do, we would love some feedback. First, feedback to each other. And we've got some smart people. We know this because you guys have asked some really great questions on this webinar. So we want to know what you're going to do that you've learned or you're going to do differently so that you can each see what are those tips and tricks that you're going to give a try. We're going to capture all of these and then, as per usual, give this back out to you as a PDF. And so you're going to have that cheat sheet of what everybody is going to attempt to do. And I know it takes just a minute to get those typed in. So expand my emotional vocabulary. That's a great one. Am I actually naming the emotion appropriately? There's a big difference between I'm disappointed versus I'm frustrated. Asking for feedback. Tell me a good book on emotional intelligence and I'll read it. So, hey, if you've got some good books, go ahead and put those in this list and we'll get them captured in the PDF. Daniel Goleman is a great place to start. That's kind of like starting with the primer, emotional intelligence at work. I am the message 24/7. Thinking about what emotions are productive versus, man, that fueled a Netflix binge. That did not fuel anything that was actually productive in my day. Awareness of the nonverbal cues, especially potentially on video. and control.
Facial leak. That's a great
leak.
phrase.
I like it.
I went from happy into resting murder face. Huh. Perfect.
That happened real quick. All right. And then the last piece is feedback to us. Please keep putting those in because we're going to capture them in the PDF. If you wouldn't mind filling out this poll, we'd so appreciate it. We take your feedback to heart and do our best to make each of these better and better for you all to participate in. So that poll is up and you can fill that out. As you complete that, we will put up what our future events are. So if you can join us for some things that we have upcoming. Oh, I almost forgot Matt's favorite slide. Sorry, Christopher Walken. He claims that the More Cowbell, the SNL skit has ruined his life because wherever he goes to include Italian restaurants, people will ask him things like, do you want more cowbell with your pasta bolognese? So I'm not really feeling that sorry for Christopher Walken, but there you go. Things that we have coming up. We have a Q&A with St. Louis Blues president Chris Zimmerman. And so, yes, they won the Stanley Cup. Yes, they're some of our hometown heroes, but he's actually going to talk about how do you bring community together when you actually can't play hockey. So their kind of purpose, their why, their reason for existing is to lean into the community. So what does that look like for them? We're going to do Rock On, how to bring your band back together. So whatever that looks like, it's partial work from home, it's we're back in the office, we were an essential business, it's safety procedures, and we're going to get into that conversation. And then as Matt mentioned, we have a 2-part course. It is Include Rethink Diversity in Your Workplace. That is an online course that we're offering free of charge if you'd like to join us for that, May 21st and June 4th. All of this you can register on our website. So with that, I know we were just a couple minutes over today. Appreciate y'all hanging out with us. And we are going to play you out, of course, to some cowbell music because that's the theme for today. And just appreciate y'all being here.